Hello, this is Kim with Standing on Solid Ground. I am your host of this motivational and inspirational podcast. And today's book of the Bible, Nehemiah. Nehemiah is the 16th book of the Old Testament. Nehemiah is the son of Hakaliah, his name meaning God's comfort. He was a Jewish leader who supervised the rebuilding of Jerusalem in the mid-5th century BC after his release from Persia, which he was considered in captivity under the king Astartes. And I know that I messed that up, but I'm not going to try to say that again. But anyway, he was under a king. Nehemiah was shown or told about the conditions of the children of Israel, and the rebuilding of Jerusalem was very important. The walls had come down. I believe in that time there was a big war and a large attack that had been on the children of Israel. And a brethren in which he referred to had came to him, Hananiah, had came to him and asked for his assistance. And of course, Nehemiah prayed out to God and asked for direction and guidance in what to do in order to rebuild the land that had been so terribly destroyed. And I believe it was possibly due to a war that they were not victorious in. And Nehemiah is showing us how to be conquerors and how to align our lives with God. That he did not take it upon himself to just go and say, oh, I'm going to go and rebuild this wall and we're going to do this and we're going to do that. He called out to God for instructions, detail by detail, what to do. Almost like with Noah. Although God went to Noah and told him what he wanted him to do and how big and how tall and how wide and the depths of everything. In this case, Nehemiah went to God and asked for guidance on how to go into this land to rebuild these walls. And even with the oppositions that came his way, he could not be stopped. That he even asked for assistance from the king that he may go in peace and build this wall. Although, of course, Satan wasn't going to sit still for that. But at any event, the wall was successfully built. Now, Nehemiah had transformed himself from being a servant to a leader. And he didn't transform him, God did. He became from that self-servant or that servant role to the king to becoming a leader in dictatorship in order to get this wall put back up. They needed a strong person to come in and take over and tell them what is needed to be done to get this wall back up. And so safety can be felt by the children of Israel again. And he prayed for discernment of God's will and followed God's lead every step of the way when he was given the okay, number one, to do this, and number two, direction and guidance in how to get it done. The importance of this book is to reflect on not just rebuilding the city, but rebuilding our lives spiritually with the way that we find ourselves in captivity in our own walls. That the symbolic attribute of this all is to show us that God can rebuild our lives. The walls can be torn down from around us and we can be exposed. Our vulnerabilities can be put out there. But God can rebuild ourselves once again, rebuild us, that we can be more in tune with God and God can be more in tune with us. And that rebuilding of Jerusalem, although it is an important factor to show us that God can send the right people in our lives to help us rebuild. We have to follow their lead. We have to be willing to humble ourselves and say, this person has come into our lives to help us. Now we need to be willing to receive their help and not be cocky and be stubborn and thinking, oh, I got this, I can figure this out on my own. No, we can't. That's why we cry out to God. And God placed these people in our lives. Again, this is a chess game between Satan and God. God knows the right moves to make. Where we fall short and where Satan becomes ahead, not so much beating God, but stay a step ahead of us, is because we push away the help that God sends to us. But in this case, the children of Israel received Nehemiah. Nehemiah was a very strong individual. And in the importance of understanding and rebuilding our lives, sometimes it takes that outsider to come in and say, here I am. I'm here to help you. And this is who Nehemiah was. He was there to help them. Now, Nehemiah was a simple man. He wasn't recognized off the top as a prophet or a priest. He was the king's cupbearer, an officer of the high rank in the royal courts, whose duties were to pour and to serve the drinks of the royal table. In Haggai 1:1, however, he was identified as a high priest. Nehemiah's role not only was to build the wall, but to make sure that the laws of God were read and understood by those that were capable of understanding the reading and following through on the laws, meaning not the babies, but those that were of age to understand. You know, God had touched my dad, and he said, you guys are at the age of understanding, meaning when we turned maybe 7, 8, 9 years old, we were at the age of understanding right and wrong, yes and no, left and right, up and down. We were at that age. And so that's when he instilled in us the word of God. Now, a lot of times he may have felt like he was unsuccessful, but I think that God had to show my dad, these are your fruits that you bear. These are the seeds that you sowed a long time ago. And now you got to bear them. You got to harvest them. You can't get mad at them because they're reaping. You're reaping what you sown. And it took a long time for my dad to get to that point. I don't know if he fully got to that point. But at some point in his life, he had to accept the responsibility that these are my seeds that I have sown, and I must bear the fruit from them, whether I like them or not. And when God had appointed Nehemiah to have these laws read and for them to be understood, meaning you have no excuses. You have no excuses. That's why the word of God always have to be out there, no matter what. Whether a person receives it or not, it has to be out there. Because if it's not, then they have an opportunity to get it right. It has to be out there, but it has to be the right word. And this is why Nehemiah stressed this so much, that the word of God must be read, but it must be read with understanding. That the people of Israel need to know what God is saying. Because if you go out here and sin and you say, well, I didn't understand the word of God, I just thought it was a bunch of gibberish. You know, they can't be held accountable if they don't understand. That's why God has so many people teaching and preaching and evangelizing and prophesying. That's why. God is not leaving anyone with no excuses. And this is what Nehemiah was all about. He didn't want to leave room for any excuses of not knowing. The book of the Bible today is Nehemiah. It is the next one that I have tackled, and it is the one that is profound. Although his role may have been small, it had great importance. Just like has been mentioned before, all of our roles may not be gigantic, but the small roles are just as important as any other role in the Word of God. This is Kim with Standing on Solid Ground. You have yourself a wonderful and blessed day.